Hello, everyone.
Hey, everyone.
This is Annie.
And this is Gail.
And this is Heroes.
And Zeros.
A true crime podcast.
That's right.
Hi.
Hey, Annie.
How's it going, everyone? We're entering part 3 of our episode.
I am so, I'm not excited, but I'm on edge because the last time we wrapped everything up, it was the fact that, they were trying to find this little girl that she had been, the neighbor, she's a little paper girl, and the lady that she had most recently gone to the house to get payment really thought she saw her being abducted by this man, but it went so fast. Of course, she reached out to the parents. They reached out to the police. They started reaching out to TV stations.
And the family were Mormon, so they had quite a group of networking.
That's right. So,
and I was thinking of my little grandmother when she was alive. Being elderly, I think she died when she was almost 92. You're at home a lot, even though she's very mobile. And you look out the window. You look out what's going on around the neighborhood. And, being elderly, you look out and a little girl just left your house. So you kind of just watch her because you're making sure she's going to make it home okay or make it to the next stop. You're just I don't want to say snoopy. It's snoopy in a good way.
Yeah. That reminds me, though, that's the hard thing about living on a lake. And in our old neighborhood in Phoenix, it was this way, too. Everybody's houses really faced the back, meaning they were facing the mountains or facing your pool. Yeah. So you really didn't look out front to the street. And it's the same here at the lake. If you're on the lake, your house is set up to look over the lake, not to look at the front where people are driving by and things. So Yeah. So I'm glad she was in a place where somebody was sitting, looking out the window. So at least we've got a little bit of head start.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So Annie, take it away.
Yep. So in Pocatello, Idaho, in the past 15 years, 5 young girls had been abducted and murdered in Pocatello. Only one of those cases were ever cleared, though, that of Lynette Dawn Culver. And if you think her name sounds familiar, it's because she was serial killer Ted Bundy, one of his victims.
Oh, whoa.
He was responsible for her murder, and he confessed more than a decade later, though her body had never been recovered. That leaves 4 unsolved murders, and like Jeralee, they were very young, ranging from 12 to 14 years of age. Chief of Police James Benham was called while he was at home. When he heard of the disappearance of an 11-year-old female newspaper carrier, alarm bells were flying, and he rushed to Main and Carter Streets to take charge. Benham immediately ordered a door-to-door canvass of all the homes in the vicinity and ordered officers to search the 3 locations around Pocatello where the 4 young bodies of the murdered young girls were found. Adding to Chief Benham's worries was the fact that 30 minutes had lapsed since Blanche Tucker saw Jeralee being pushed into a vehicle, and the time that the police received the call from Jeff Underwood. On the first day of Scott Shaw's long-awaited vacation, he received word of young Jeralee's abduction. His wife, Vonnie, she also worked at the Idaho State Journal. She worked in sales, and at the end of her work week, she and her husband, along with her 2 children, Chrissy and David, were going to go to Disneyland. But when Scott got off the phone, she didn't even ask what the call was about. Not even a word ever was said about the upcoming vacation. She just knows this is the job. And, it's a small community. A young child is missing, you're not going to complain about not getting to go to Disneyland. For a solid week, Scott would only see his family when they were in their bed sleeping. The next morning, the day after young Jeralee's disappearance, Dave Haggard was sitting in his kitchen when he heard his cousin Jim pull into the driveway. He watched through the open blinds that Wood pulled a plastic bucket out of the trunk of his Buick. He filled it with water, then washed his car. When he finished, Wood pulled the car into the garage, and then Haggard heard the sound of the wet, dry vacuum turn on. A few minutes later, Wood pulled his car out of the garage and drove it around to the back of Dave's property and went into the house. Dave thought it looked like Wood had been awake all night long. He didn't look very good. Wood said he had been awake and that he had met up with some Mexican friends, and then he walked downstairs towards his bedroom. Hager then went outside later that morning, and he looked for Jim's car, and he found that he didn't park it in the driveway like he normally did. Instead, he pulled it behind the house and parked it between Dave's camper and Dave's boat. The camper completely hid the Buick from the road. A little red flag popped up there for him. Later that day, curious about Jim's behavior, Dave also noticed that Jim had shaved off his mustache. Scott Shaw made... I type in here, then I'm going to cut this out. Scott Shaw woke up, is what I have typed.
Nice typing.
Yeah, it is. Scott Shaw woke up at 5:30 that morning and called his shift commander. Shaw learned that another witness had been found that night before, about 11 o'clock. One of Blanche Tucker's neighbors, Ron Phipps, said he was working in his yard that afternoon when he saw Jeralee talking to a man outside a car parked on West Carter. When Phipps turned away for just a moment, the sound of a car leaving at a high speed of rate caused him to turn around and see what was going on. The car sped through the intersection of Main and Carter and turned left at the end of the next block on Arthur Street. Phipps said he never saw Jeralee in the car, though, but he did give a better description of the vehicle. He said it was a newer model, cream-colored, with a dark vinyl top. He believed the car to be a Buick. Shaw showered, dressed, drove to the corner of Main and Carter, where the young girl had been abducted. Scott was familiar with the area since he drove by it every day on his way to work. Shaw parked his Bronco along the curb on Main and walked along the sidewalk to the big elm tree where the Buick had been parked. Looking toward Blanche Tucker's house, he saw that it was not maybe 50 or 60 feet from Blanche's window. After inspecting the grease spot that he found on the ground, loose gravel and tire marks on the street, Shaw thought that maybe they'll be able to get a cast impression made, but they weren't even sure that it was the kidnapper's car that left them. Looking around the area, Looking around the area, Shaw saw a brush-covered barrier where the narrow street came to a dead end less than a block away. But still, he thought, there were houses in every direction, and it was a highly visible place to abduct a child, and in the broad daylight to boot, especially at a time when traffic would have been fairly heavy on Main Street because people were passing by through the neighborhood and on their way home from work. It's been 14 hours now since Jeralee Underwood disappeared.
Oh, no.
Yep. Scott Shaw he went back to the station, gathered with 6 or 7 other officers that all outranked him in Chief Benham's office. They were throwing around theories regarding the young girl's disappearance. Trouble at home? Was she a runaway? Did she have a boyfriend? Quickly, they ruled out all of those theories and they were dismissed. The girl had actually been seen being forced into a car, making it clear that they were dealing with a stranger abduction. That has to be the hardest. An FBI profiler had a theory about the type of offender who had abducted the young girl. A man with an organized personality that had carefully planned and executed the abduction. Most likely a serial offender who didn't live in or near Pocatello. To lessen his chances of being recognized, the offender usually traveled extensively to locate his victims. This is still the profile. I think it's ironic.
Right, because I'm like,
Nope. Mm-hmm. They didn't have criminal mind profilers there, did they? He would choose locations that were high risk for his victims and low risk for himself, a place where an abduction would unlikely be witnessed. The theory went on, and how he would most likely take his victims as far away as possible before sexually assaulting them. He would then dispose of their bodies in a remote area, making it highly unlikely that the body would not soon be found, if at all. The officers continued to discuss what the next step would be. Assuming the FBI's profile was correct, how are they going to go about finding the suspect? Given the profile theory, the suspect should be 2 states away by now. Shaw, who was always quiet in these kind of meetings, he said nothing. He just listened, usually giving his opinion only when asked. Chief Benham breaks during the conversation, turns around and says, "What do you think, Scott?" Shaw took a deep breath. He was about to contradict the FBI's theory, one that most of the officers in the room seemed to agree with. "I think it's wrong." Shaw went on to explain to all the open mouths in the room and all the eyes looking at him. He thinks the offender is not organized. What he did was very disorganized. Look where the abduction took place. Main and Carter? Broad daylight in front of witnesses? He didn't plan this. He didn't plan it at all. The prick just saw an opportunity and took it. I love Scott Shaw.
Me too.
The witness said the little girl didn't act nervous, like she had seen him before, maybe even in the neighborhood. Maybe he spends time in that same neighborhood. Maybe even he is a local. One of the surprised officers asked Shaw if he thought the behavioral science unit is wrong. Shaw replied that he thought there was still a good chance that whoever took her was still around. Like, let's just focus on this, not, oh, you're contradicting the FBI's profiler. The room went quiet. After a few moments, the chief turns to Shaw and says, "Okay, Scott, you're going to lead the case." The rest of the officers in the room were told that Shaw will have everyone's full cooperation, and all the resources that Pocatello had at their disposal would go into investigating the disappearance of this little girl. Way to go, Chief Benham. It was decided quite quickly that the police department would fully cooperate also with the media. In fact, they would seek the media's help in publicizing certain aspects of the investigation. They could use all of the information that they could get from the public. In an unusual move, the department agreed to make Shaw's name and his position public, hoping to draw out the suspect in a game of matching wits. Tip sheets were drawn up for everyone answering the phones. Immediately, a flood of calls were coming in from the public on vehicle sightings of the little girl, even from police and other departments and other cities that were offering to come in and help with the case. From this moment onward, Detective Scott Shaw was going to begin the investigation with two things in mind.
The infestation or the instigation?
Investigation.
Oh, not even either of those words. Investigation.
Investigation, thank you. She had to cover for me trying to scratch my nose. Oh my gosh. And I just blew. Why even did it help me? Oh. From this moment onward, Detective Scott Shaw was going to begin the investigation with two things in mind. One, find the body of an 11-year-old little girl. And two, find the man that killed her.
Gosh, they don't even know if she's dead yet.
Nope.
I mean, that is a little different than how police work nowadays, is that it's not a homicide until, well, they don't have to find a body, but they would treat it more as a missing persons than a homicide.
That's what's interesting about this case is Scott Shaw, and you'll find out immediately, is going to presume she's dead, so that, and I'll read that pretty soon.
All right, sorry, see? I'm paying attention.
You are, baby. Treating this case as a homicide from the very beginning, Gail is right, would force everyone to approach evidence found as crucial, and nothing will be overlooked. Nothing would be lost if she were found alive.
Okay, get it.
Assuming the suspect was local, Shaw outlined the boundaries of what would be the largest door-to-door canvass in the history of the Pocatello Police Department. Wednesday, June 30th, 1992, Shaw visits the home of Joyce and Jeff Underwood. He was familiar with the neighborhood, though he had never met the family. When he approached the Underwood home, he realized that he once owned a home very close to theirs. In fact, it was right behind the cul-de-sac in their subdivision. Women were coming in and out of the home carrying dishes. He asked a woman that was near the entrance if he could speak to Mr. and Mrs. Underwood, so she let him inside. The anguished looks on the faces of a couple inside left little doubt as to who they were. He introduced himself, shook their frail hands, and noticed how frail both of them seemed. The three of them retired to the kitchen to talk. Shaw asked the parents to describe their daughter, her likes and her dislikes, her personality, etc. This information would be sent to the FBI's behavioral unit in Quantico, Virginia. The data would be put into the agency's computer system known as VICAP, Violent Criminal Apprehension Program. Shaw learned that Jeralee was a very smart young girl who was very responsible for her age. She would babysit her younger siblings, she would make meals for the family, and made friends very quickly with all of her customers. Jeralee did know about child safety. She was told not to accept rides from strangers, to never walk up to a car if someone stopped them to ask for directions or for any other reason. Basically, Jeralee had a level of common sense that was far above her age level. The Underwoods were told to give as many public interviews as they possibly could, as many as they're up to, and to always have a photograph of their little girl. When Shaw asked for copies of Jeralee's birth certificate and medical and dental records, Joyce's lip began to quiver. Her eyes reddened, and Jeff put his arm around her shoulder as she fought back the tears. Then she got up to get the information he had asked for. Shaw left the home after an hour, glanced over the neighborhood, and realized that he had lived only 2 houses away from the Underwoods. The kids had the same kind of toys and could have even played together. An overwhelming sense of sadness washed over him. A new FBI profile was agreed upon. The offender is a non-specific sexual offender. He feels he is inadequate and suffers from low self-esteem. He is a loner, quiet, and could be considered strange or unusual. He dresses casually and practices poor personal hygiene. He may have some physical deformity, such as a limp or a birthmark. He will feel very frustrated because of prior failures. Scott Shaw drafted a more detailed profile, one that would be used as a benchmark in evaluating possible suspects, tips, and other information. It read, "The offender is believed to be disorganized. Therefore, the actual offense was most likely a compulsive act. A ruse was probably used that required Underwood to walk to an area that was in close proximity to his vehicle. A witness report said the girl pulled something from inside her bank bag to show the offender. She didn't appear to be nervous or show any apprehension, so he most likely tricked her into something that she was comfortable with, most likely what she was doing at the time of contact." Man, he nailed it.
He did.
"The degree of probability is rather high that the ruse would include a problem with a very recently collected payment. This could include a question of an unsigned check, an overpayment, or something similar. It is reasonable to assume that the offender either paid for his bill or was present when a bill was paid."
Ding,
Dang.
ding, 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 ding.
Winner, winner, chicken dinner. And so obviously we know who the hero of this story is. Yes, it is Scott Shaw. He went on to add what physical traits he thought the offender would have, which kind of blows my mind that you can even imagine what the guy would look like based on a profile that you came up with because you kind of know how to profile. Statistically, he will be pear-shaped or have a beer belly. He will drive an older model car. He will reside with a relative because
ding, ding.
He has no steady income.
Ding, ding.
Wow. How do they do that? Just after 10 the next morning, Detective Mike Brennan began knocking on doors in Blanche Tucker's neighborhood, looking for customers on Jeralee's route that Jeralee had stopped to collect a payment from. When he arrived at Liz Smith's house, Tammy, her daughter, answered the door and confirmed that Jeralee had come to the home and her mother wrote her a check. Tammy retrieved the checkbook and opened it to the entry. Ron Phipps was later also visited. Blanche's neighbor, the second eyewitness, was asked to point out cars that most resembled the one he saw speeding away at the time of Underwood's abduction. He pointed out 2. Both were off-white, early 80s Pontiac Grand Prix. I want to say that I want to go back to when he went to Liz Smith's house. They asked them he asked Tammy and Liz if there was anybody at their house that day.
Yeah.
And she thought of Jim as family, so she said no. Just us, all of us.
Oh.
Yeah. Come on, people. Be specific.
And keep in mind,
I hate to say this, but I think Liz Smith was a little dense. We're going to find out later. Sorry. I just hit my microphone. I shouldn't be mad at people that, aren't privy to what's going on, but maybe that's a good flag to remember that watch for people's
well, I think what's a good reminder is that you as the investigators and as the public, we all have a responsibility to share every little detail and ask every question we can, because Hetty said, okay, who was all in the room when she was here? That's a different question than was there anyone else here?
Yeah. Exactly. So, it's how you word it.
It is.
Brian and I were just talking about that last night.
It's a real big, it is. And then as people, when we think of, again, a crime that we may be asked about, every tiny little detail matters. It doesn't matter how tiny, and who is in the room matters.
Yeah,
So,
and you know what? I'm going to give Liz Smith a break, and I'm going to retract what I said, because I was thinking I'm not a suspicious person, so that would require everybody to be suspicious of your friends, people that come to your house, and I'm not that person. In fact, when I see things going on where people are questioning their friends and people that, are acquaintances or people that live in our community, it just makes me mad. If someone's trying to do something underhanded.
Oh, and yeah. So
just that'd be like
trust. You have a lot of trust. Until it's broke, you have that trust. Yeah. Yeah. So again, though, it goes back to communication is all about your word choices. And if you're listening, yes, this is a true crime podcast, but it's also a learning. And that is, the fact is how you say something gives you the answer. So again, is there anyone else here today, this weekend or that day? No, it was just us and the family.
And who lives in this house?
And I would have said, who exactly was in this room?
Yeah, exactly.
And then it's a much different answer. So
yeah.
No, we learn.
I agree.
We learn.
Yep.
Okay, so they've gone to Liz's. They've now gone to another neighbor who's looking at different cars and saying, it looks like this car, looks like this one is off-white. And so then what?
That afternoon, the Idaho State Journal ran a banner headline, "Search continues for abducted girl," bold caps. And below that was a color photograph showing her smiling, wearing her large oval glasses. The TV news on both network affiliates also, and in another Idaho Falls, and in nearby Idaho Falls, led with the story on the missing girl. Another segment opened with a video taken right across Main Street, looking towards Blanche Tucker's house, with reporters stating, "Neighbors along the 700 block of South Main, where Jeralee was abducted yesterday, are expressing their concern." The video was shot in bright sunlight, showing the front of Blanche's house. Visible to the right of Blanche's house was a blue-framed home of the next-door neighbor, Liz Smith. And I was thinking as I was researching this that you can see why news reporters and people in the criminal field, they go to the scene of the crime. They go to where she was abducted, because you never know. If you look up at the TV and you see a picture of your good friend Liz, and right next door where the neighbor was seeing the little girl getting pushed into the car, people would start to think, hey, I have a friend that's there, or that's where I know so-and-so is a friend of that person. I mean, all those little things start clicking into place more. And I hats off to all those people in law enforcement to spend so much of their time and day and trying to help us. At 6 p.m. on Wednesday, the evening after Jeralee was abducted, a prayer vigil was held, attended by thousands. At the end of the service, Jeff Underwood stood up to speak. He hated public speaking, but a strange calm overcame him. He looked over the congregation, asked that they pray for a miracle, then he spoke directly to his daughter's abductor. "Please don't hurt her. Please let her go. Let her come back to the family and the friends who love her." That same afternoon, prayer vigils were held, more posters were hung, flyers were handed out, and traffic stops were conducted at checkpoints on Main, Arthur, and Old Bannock Highway. But the only result was a delay in rush hour traffic. When Scott Shaw arrived home, he climbed the stairs for a few hours of sleep, found a handwritten note at the top of the stairwell. It reads, "Daddy, please find Jeralee. I went to school with her and I knew her. She was just one grade behind me. I love you, Chrissy."
Oh, whoa.
Very sad.
Yeah, it affects everyone.
Yep. On Thursday, July 1st, 1993, the United States Army's Gray Bell helicopter did a sweep using infrared technology along Port Neuf River and the foothills south of Pocatello, along the rough and rugged canyons. A small, freshly turned mound of dirt was revealed, and something was in the shallow pit. The helicopter lands in a small clearing. The officers get out, they walk down the hill, and they scoop away several inches of dark gray earth, only to reveal the body of a dead dog. Later that day, Joyce and Jeff Underwood agreed to more television interviews. The news segment ended with comments from Jeralee's younger 6-year-old sister, Jennifer. Like her sister, Jennifer had thick auburn hair and a sprinkling of freckles across her face. Quietly, she says, "I'm scared. I want Jeralee to come back. I'm praying that she will come back. And I guess they didn't even get charged or get a bill from the infrared technology helicopter. So that was, I think everybody in the community was coming together and trying to help each other. Detective Shaw was still at his desk at midnight on Friday, scouring over tip sheets, when one caught his eye. A woman who identified herself as Jane Pierce said that the police should check out a nephew of hers. His name is James E. Wood. The caller says he had spent time in prison for cutting up 2 girls and was living in Pocatello with a relative, Dave Haggard.
So another tip.
Yep.
Okay.
The physical description matched that of the profile, and that he drove a 1984 brown and tan Buick Century, and even offered up the license plate number. She told them that he left earlier that day for a camping trip, though she had no idea where. Shaw asked one of the stenographers to run a computer check on one James E. Wood. 3 people popped up in the area with a criminal history, though none matched that profile. But still, the caller's description of Wood as strange and that he was living with a relative put him at the top of the list as a person of interest. The next morning, Shaw had Detective Lynn drive to Chubbuck, a suburb of Pocatello, with a Polaroid camera to see if the suspect's Buick Century was possibly there. When Lynn returned with the pictures, Shaw had him take one to Ron Phipps and one to Blanche Decker's home. Both witnesses couldn't give 100% ID on the car. At best, they both said they thought the color was the same. So even though this is the vehicle, as an eyewitness, they still weren't sure. So
absolutely. I think that's very normal.
It is.
So in other words, he either had moved the car or they had found it in between the camper.
Yep. He walked around the house and found it, and then took a picture thinking if that was the car, could these 2 witnesses find it? And then is this person that lives at this house our suspect?
And I think this is, again, a great reminder of how important it is to try to remember those details, because they had said the car was off-white.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's brown.
And it's tan, with the dark brown vinyl. Yeah.
And so...
Shoot.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
When the subject of the missing girl came up, Wood sat on the edge of his seat. Oh, wait. Hang on. As the... Jeepers, criminy, Annie.
It's okay.
At the campground where Dave Haggard and his cousin Jim, they were going to stay for the night, extended family from Haggard members were sitting around the campfire, deep in conversation. Okay, I'm going to start over. At the campground where Dave Haggard and his cousin Jim were staying for the night, extended family members from the Haggard family were sitting around the campfire, deep in conversation. Wood was just sitting in a folding lawn chair, quiet and seemingly distracted. When the subject of the missing girl came up, Wood scooted to the edge of his seat and said nothing, and he tried to make it look like he wasn't listening. After a few minutes, he excused himself and went inside Haggard's camper. Everyone around the campfire wondered why he left. They all agreed that normally he would enjoy partaking in conversation. He was a little bit of a chatterbox and tried to be all charming, Instead, he was unusually quiet and actually acted as if he had never even heard about the case. Quiet conversation continued amongst the family sitting around the campfire, and Jim was smack dab in the middle of it. James Wood thought he was clever. The family members noticed that he had shaved his mustache and goatee after a young girl was raped with her baby sister in the car. Another one remembered that he used to wear a jean jacket, didn't he, with a fleece lining, but then all of a sudden he stopped wearing it. And didn't those sketches of the suspect look a lot like their cousin? At last, someone spoke up and said what everyone was thinking. I think Jim had something to do with the kidnapping of that little girl. On Monday morning, shortly before 8, a second tip sheet came in naming Jim Wood as a suspect. The call was taken by Chief Benham's secretary. From this tip, they learned about a young girl that was abducted from a Pizza Hut and that had been raped, then let go. Her description looked a lot like Jim Wood, and, the caller added, Wood has friends that live in the area where Jeralee went missing. When Dave Haggard returns from his camping trip, he gets a phone call from his sister Pearl. The two are discussing the possibility of Jim being involved in the disappearance of the little girl. They both came to the conclusion that there were definitely some red flags. especially after Pearl says that she talked to Liz Smith and Jim was at her house when Jeralee showed up, and then he suddenly left to go get beer, but he never returned. Just then, Wood returns with the Ford pickup Dave had bought from him. Dave was irritated. He never even asked. Remember, Dave bought that truck back from him, but now he wasn't driving the car that he bought for Jim. So he was going to confront Jim about it, but then decided against it when Wood pulled into the garage and vacuumed it out. Haggard decided to go move the Cadillac that appeared to be hiding Wood's Buick. Now it was visible from the street. He decided, you know what, buddy, I'm going to see if any of this starts clicking into place. Is he really hiding it, or are we just being paranoid? When his cousin went downstairs to his bedroom, Haggard went out to the pasture, and just as he expected, Wood had moved the Buick so it was once again back hidden behind the house. Convinced now, Dave went into the garage, opened the top of the vacuum, lifted out the dusty dirt bag, and locked it in a wooden cabin.
Whoa!
Near the workbench. That's another hero. Dave Haggard, you know, he would give his house to anybody that wanted to live there with him, and he didn't want to be duped. Dave went inside and called his sister Pearl and told her that he was going to go to the police. Back at the police station, another call came in from a Betty Grimes. She said she wanted to talk to an officer about the Underwood case. Detective Scott Shaw takes the call. Betty says she thinks her cousin took that little girl. Before they went any further, Scott took Betty's phone number and then had her continue. Betty tells Shaw her cousin Dave Haggard said Jimmy was out all night the night the little girl disappeared, and when he came home the next morning, he was cleaning out his car. He also spends a lot of time at Lizzie Smith's house, who was on the little girl's paper route. Shaw sends Detective Brennan to Betty's work location to continue this interview, because when they started asking Betty more questions, she says, you know what, I can't talk about it anymore because I'm at work. I'll call you when I'm off of work. And they're like, no, lady, we're not waiting another 4 hours or whatever. So they send someone to her workplace. Brennan then returns with information about the camping trip from the Haggard family that they were on, and several family members discussed their suspicions about Wood. She said that he drives a 1984 brown over tan Buick Century and spends a lot of time near Maine and Carter. Shaw grabs the file folder laying on his desk. He thumbs through the list of Jeralee's subscribers, and he finds Blanche Tucker's house and then Liz Smith's. The adrenaline is pumping through his veins when he sees that they live right next door to one another. Brennan left for Haggard's home to find the Buick. Shaw thumbs through the profile, then heads upstairs. A film crew, ironically, for America's Most Wanted is there to do the story on Jeralee's disappearance. And people, you know what? Gail and I don't tell each other what cases we're going to run. And so many times, Gail, the subject has come up that it's like a segue that you really knew nothing about. But
I didn't.
But it is a segue.
I am pretty impressed.
Na.
I guess that's saying I'm impressed with myself.
Well, I'm impressed with
stuff. Film crew's there, American Most Wanted.
They're there to do the story on Jeralee's disappearance. Shaw was certain that they had their man, but he thought maybe the show would bring them even more information on the suspect so that they could be sure to get a conviction. While Shaw was being interviewed by America's Most Wanted, over the intercom comes a voice. There's a Mr. David Haggard out front who wants to talk to somebody about the Underwood case. Just before 5 on Tuesday afternoon, Detective Shaw and prosecutor Mark Heidemann visit Judge Box in his chambers. After revealing all of the details of what they have, they're worried that they weren't giving enough information, so they were nervously awaiting his ruling. And this is, I think,
Is this for like a warrant?
Yeah, because but they're trying to quickly put together all this information so that they can convince the judge not only is he a suspect, we think he is it and we need to arrest him, but do they have enough information that Judge Box is going to agree? Judge Box looks up, says he has reviewed the attachments to the affidavit and is issuing an arrest warrant for James E. Wood with a bond to be set at $750,000. Yeah. Just before 7:30, Chief Benham and Detective Brennan pulled onto the grass in front of Dave Haggard's home. Inside, Haggard is nervously playing with a cigarette. Brennan knocks on the door, then steps back. Shaw is standing on the edge of the deck, as far from the front door as possible, with his hand just above his 10mm Smith & Wesson. At the sound of Brennan's knock, Wood snaps awake. He grabs the .357 Magnum he had placed in the chair and cautiously answers the door. 2 policemen introduce themselves and tell Wood that they would like to speak to him. He tells them, "Oh, hang on just a second." He stuffs the gun back into the chair's cushion, then opens the door. Instantly, the officers are yelling that he was under arrest and pointing their semi-automatics in his face. Wood is forced onto the floor of the deck, face down. He is straddled and handcuffed while Brennan has a pistol to the back of his head. Pulled to his feet and ushered toward the steps, Shaw speaks up. "Geez, they didn't have to do all that." He was pretending that the officers might have used excessive force. He was trying to distance himself from the actual
issue,
the actual arrest,
right,
so that he might be viewed by the suspect as a more, person on his side.
Mm-hmm.
Surprised, Wood looks at Shaw and says, "Well, Scott, how are you?" Scott Shaw is shocked that he not only recognized him, but knew his name. "Sounds like you've been watching the news, Jim." Then Shaw opens the passenger door of the squad car and seats Wood inside. Detective Scott Shaw interviews James E. Wood for hours, and after gaining his respect because he was just doing his job, Wood tells Shaw the horrific story of what he did to little Jeralee Underwood on June 29, 1993. Wood tells Shaw that he was at a friend's home when the little girl comes in to collect for her paper route. When she leaves, he catches up with the 11-year-old and shoves her into his car. He then drove her to the Preston area and then back to Pocatello, which was how he was able to avoid police checkpoints. During the drive, Jeralee asks him, why did he kidnap her? He didn't answer her. She told him about her clogging class and her Mormon faith. He then stops along the Snake River north of Idaho Falls so that she could have a little bathroom break. He follows her, and as she is crouching to go potty, he shoots her twice in the back of the head. He hides her body beneath some bushes and rapes her corpse.
Oh, God.
Motherfucker. 1 week later, he returns to the body, removes her genitals, then dismembers her.
What? I did not know he was into that, too.
This guy is disgusting. He removes her genitals, then dismembers her into a bunch of little pieces and scatters the remains into the Snake River. On January 14th, 1993, James Wood is officially charged with 14 crimes, including the kidnapping and rapes of Beth Edwards and Karen Davis, and the kidnapping and murder of Jeralee Underwood.
I'm so sad to hear that she was killed.
Mm-hmm.
This poor little girl and their family and her little sister.
Yep. He is sentenced to death by lethal injection. While Wood was convicted of only one homicide, it is believed that he actually murdered dozens and dozens of his victims. As we said earlier, he raped 85 women and is responsible for 185 armed robberies. On February 2nd, 2004, while sitting on death row, Jim Wood dies from a heart attack. So he's in prison for 10 years. Jeannie Fazer, though she survived her horrible ordeal, was in a coma for 3 weeks. Remember the very first girl we heard about in our case? He takes her from a gas station.
Oh, yes.
And then rapes her and then shoots her. Well, she didn't die.
Yep.
Her boyfriend had been arrested, and he sat in jail as the prime suspect.
That's right.
For 35 days before Jeannie could actually speak to clear him. To this day, she suffers from seizures.
That's right, because Jeannie squeezed the hands for yes or no, and she got it mixed up.
Yep.
Okay. Yep. I'm sure our audience now is recalling that, too, from part one.
Yep. To this day, she suffers from seizures, is paralyzed on her right side, has a speech impediment and long-term memory loss, is deaf in one ear and blind in one eye, and bullet fragments remain lodged in her brain. And on hang on, sorry. My thing moved on me. As we said earlier, you know what? I want to go back. I'll just delete it. On February 2nd, 2004, while sitting on death row, Jim E. Wood dies from a heart attack. And that's the end of our story. Yep.
I'm just sitting here like...
a little shocked. Sorry.
Well, here's the deal. At the end of the day, he was convicted. He was put on death row. He ended up dying of natural causes. And, you know, we all know he most likely did not move up to heaven. It just is a sad, sad situation that, again, and I believe this happens a lot, that there are little details missed. Remember, back when somebody said his name was James Woods versus Wood, and all those little details really make a difference. So
yeah, and there are a lot more details if you want to read that book, Eye of the Beast.
Eye of the Beast,
yep.
Yes.
Then you certainly, you know, you can get all the information and the ins and outs and how Detective Scott Shaw, you know, helped in, you know, if they would have gone with the FBI's profile of the suspect, they wouldn't have been looking for someone local.
No, again, it's Scott Shaw, right? Detective Scott Shaw, you are a hero.
Absolutely.
James E. Wood, you are a zero.
And a zero.
We call it a zero here on Heroes and Zeros.
Yes, we do, don't we? I forgot. Jeez.
Well, wow, Annie, that was...
So I'm sorry she's not a survivor.
At the end of the day, right, I know, I'm sad too. And at the end of the day, you know, not all of our true crime stories have a happy ending. Yeah. And this is one that doesn't. So, you know what? I think what we can do, though, is we can definitely, to this day, this may have been in 1993, but her parents are still alive, I'm sure.
I think
and
so.
And that little sister. And so if you are inclined to just take a little prayer for that family, that
be awesome.
I know they're still to this day, they say the pain lessens, but it doesn't.
You're never healed.
No.
You'll have to experience pain for the rest of your life.
Condolences and loves to
the Underwoods. Underwood family.
Absolutely. And again, a shout out to Scott Shaw. Way to be the hero.
Absolutely.
Well, Annie, thank you for this 3-part unbelievable story that
I remember seeing her picture, and we'll post the picture of her, because I remember thinking, her glasses, her glasses are big, and because it was in 1993, you know. Oh, gosh.
Wow.
1992.
Yeah. And if you think about it, for those, again, young listeners, there weren't cell phones. They were just coming out.
We should be so grateful. So we just need to maybe get our phones out of our noses out of our phones so that we can actually see what's going on around us. But still, cell phone technology has to be very, very handy.
Oh, it is. Absolutely. Yep. All right, guys, go get on your phone. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.